Okay, week 2 standard is learning differences, and this is my debriefing. So we were just talking about what I think of my performance this past week, and I was saying I was more confident with how I taught on Thursday, today is Friday, than I did on Wednesday.
Which lessons did you feel more confident with?
Honestly, all of them. The phonics lesson, it wasn't really what I had planned, but it was like a review, and we did cover all of the material. But it was pretty comprehensive, and all the students were on point, so I felt good about that. I didn't feel like I had to do a whole lot of differentiating during that particular lesson. Could it have helped? Could I had like a different perspective? I'm sure there could be something to critique. What else? Writing. We discussed that. How to be more efficient with teaching the students, like the strategies you want them to when they're drafting and putting in details. Pulling small groups and utilizing that strategy would be more beneficial. And then social studies, where we co-taught, felt like the class was more in control of themselves, and we were able to get through a lot of information, especially since we didn't get a chance to review Blue Ridge and Piedmont in detail on Wednesday. So
Okay. So for learner differences, a lot of it is about differentiating, which even for veteran teachers is hard to do sometimes for every single lesson that you do.
And I recognize I'm not good at it.
So it's hard. I mean, even us teachers who've been teaching for years, we still have to work at it, think about it, and try to incorporate it into everything that we do. So for valuing students, I think that you're proficient on that. You listen to the students, you greet them when they come in, you talk to them, you try to get to know them, like you really make them feel like valued as a learner. So I think that you are proficient with that. Of course, we can always work to get better at those things. So outstanding would be promoting those interactions between students, or really encouraging students to have the conversations amongst themselves about
getting
content.
Them to value each other and their lessons.
Right. So like if you ask a student a question, you can say, okay, let's you two talk about that. Did you agree with what they said? Can you add on to what they said? Things like that would be promoting the positive interactions with students. For differentiating instruction, I did give you a 1, insufficient, because I didn't see a lot of differentiating this week. I know we've talked about it, in regards to planning for next week. So we'll just have to make an effort to really make sure we're differentiating, whether it's pulling a small group or when they're turning and talking or working at their seat, like pulling a couple people to the carpet, or changing the pace of the lesson could be differentiating it. So some students, you might tell them to go ahead and continue to work, and then the majority of them might need for you to go slower. So the pace of the lesson can also be a way to differentiate, as well as the type of content. So you can deepen the questions for some students and then give other students like basic questions.
I would especially like to concentrate on that particular point in the future for social studies lessons.
Yes.
Because I don't want to be the sage on a stage the entire time. I'm getting bored with that myself. So I would like to explore some strategies with him.
Well, the beginning of social studies, the content is such that it's harder to differentiate until you get really into the meat of what's happening with South Carolina history.
Right.
So you always have to, at the beginning of the year, it's tougher to differentiate right off the bat, because you're establishing norms and routines so that they know exactly what to expect before you start breaking them into doing more group projects and things like that. For students with learning differences, you do understand the importance of accommodating for those students, but it's not necessarily, I'm not seeing it consistently, but again, that's differentiating. So for my 504 students, Edison or Daniel, like making sure that they're sitting in the front of the classroom, or sitting at the front of the carpet, or by you, or whatever, so that they're really paying attention, or maybe giving them, like when I was passing out words yesterday for vocabulary webs, I made sure I gave them like an easier word or a smaller, shorter word. So things like that. For multiple perspectives, I have seen you do or integrate or develop lessons where you have multiple perspectives, because I've heard you like make references to different culture, especially since you have a lot of experience like not living or living in a different country. So I've heard you make reference to that. So I would just like to see, in order for me to say proficient, to see you put it in the lesson more, like plan for it so that they really take what you're saying, because I hear you put it in there, but it's not like necessarily planned for the lesson.
Like
Does
a
that
more
make sense?
human approach to it, right?
Yeah, something like that. So
Or
that
more
way they're
personal.
like, right. So then for, like, for example, since we're studying regions in social studies, you could put just like as a way to close the lesson or even to engage them. Like, I've lived in Korea or I've lived this place and they have this type of land, and let's look like how is that different from the land that we see in South Carolina or the land that you live on, something like that. English language learners, I had a really hard time rating, and I didn't choose anything because although we do have Sophie, who's an English language learner, she's on grade level, like she's reading on grade level,
Like
she's performing. So it's not necessarily that you have to differentiate for her specifically because of her, because English is not her first language. So I'm inclined to put incomplete just because we've not needed to do that. So I can't say proficient because I haven't seen you do it consistently. So I'm gonna check incomplete on that because we haven't.
There's no real way to test
but
it.
if like she starts struggling, especially with social studies, a way to help with social studies would be like we have picture cards for vocabulary, so that she can see the picture with the vocabulary. Or there's also some ideas for English language learners for phonics, like making sure they're repeating after you, certain things like that. So I'm gonna put incomplete, but I'd love to see that as we get deeper into our content.
Yeah.
Because right now it's not necessary.
Okay. Cool. Thank you.
Okay.